was in the Wall Street Journal. There is some, I don't know, he has been strong pro-Chinese, supporter in the United States, but since he wrote that article about the waning or the weakening, weak foundation of Xi Jinping political leadership and political power, that again triggered a lot of countries. In fact, the Global Asia Forum, East Asia Forum, in fact, has run the kind of debates on David Stambo's article. But I think today's lecture by Professor Susan Shook will add, will shed great insight into how we can understand the real meaning of Xi Jinping leadership. And apart from the Susan Shook, you all know the Stephen Hackett, fellow, professor at UC San Diego, and studied very renowned political economist, but now he has become one of the leading experts in North and South Korea. And he has now his own column at the 중앙일보, the Korea Jungang Daily. Okay. The 중앙일보 has been featuring Victor Cha, Michael Green, because there was some complaint from the liberal side. And they recruited Stephen Hackett. I don't know whether he's liberal or not. But anyhow, Steph joined us today because Professor Susan Shaw has a really interesting project. I was lucky to attend the first and second meeting of that gathering called the Northeast Asian Security Dialogue. I would say that is the first non-government track 1.5 in the forum through which Northeast Asian countries can engage in constructive discussions on multilateral security cooperation. And also she was the first American who could bring North Koreans to that kind of multilateral setting. I still remember Ambassador Kim Jong-soo attended your forum in La Jolla, California. And therefore, since then on, I thought that program is gone. But since then, I have not been attending it, but still existing more than 20 years. And she's having another,
You're too busy.
next meeting in Tokyo in May. Okay, therefore, she's by profession she's a China specialist, but as his personal hobby, she has been leading multilateral security cooperation regime in Northeast Asia. It's I also say that it's a very unique contribution, and because it has been kind of lone wolves, hard work, and adores much toward peace and stability in Northeast Asia, and therefore I commend her for such a great contribution. With this introduction, we'll start. Okay, let us give a big applause to.
Thank you.
We have a further journalist here. It's off the record, not on the record. Okay.
Well, thank you, Chung-En. It's really a pleasure to be here at the East Asia Institute. I'm a
East Asia
Foundation. I'm sorry. Well, also you got it's the Northeast Asia Cooperation Dialogue. So I'm not so good on names. But I am a great fan of Global Asia. I think it's just a wonderful journal, and I have great admiration for the people who edit it. It's always so interesting and having a really good impact, I think, on our debates on very interesting, important issues in Asia all the time. So, well, today I just thought I would try to present some of my preliminary ideas about what's going on in China under Xi Jinping. But before I do that, I have to give one little institutional plug and mention that I am now putting a lot of my time into chairing a program we have at UCSD called 21st Century China Program. We have been very fortunate in being able to recruit a very substantial number, 12 top China scholars, social scientists working on contemporary China. And our goal is to do original research, which we then, impactful research on China's domestic development and foreign policy that we then can communicate to policymakers, to business people. And to do a lot of the research we do collaboratively with young Chinese scholars. And Fudan University established the Fudan UC Center on Contemporary China right down the hall from us at UC San Diego. So we have really a tremendous center of strength on contemporary China, and certainly welcome students at IRPS and getting PhDs in political science or economics, and please come and visit us sometime when you are in California. So, I've been studying China for a long, long time. I first traveled to China in 1971. I've been doing research there ever since. And yet I find just when I feel that I've got things sort of figured out, China surprises me. At least it's never boring. There are always these new puzzles to try to figure out. And one of the puzzles now is the pattern of Chinese leadership. We see a pattern in authoritarian regimes worldwide, that they begin with some kind of revolutionary, charismatic leader, usually a personalistic leader, focus on the leader, not on the institutions. And then over time, as the focus shifts to governance and to economic modernization, we see a trend toward more regular, institutionalized system with collective leadership. And this has been the pattern that we saw in China post-Mao, after Deng Xiaoping introduced economic reforms, and then Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao. The pattern is the leader is first among equals, not particularly strong as an individual, and we have this kind of collective leadership. Frankly, many people in the party thought this was definitely the way to go, because the experience with personalistic leadership under Mao had been so disastrous. When you have a more dictatorial leader and nobody can say no to him, then he can lead you off a cliff, as Mao did in the Great Leap Forward and in the Cultural Revolution in particular, and many other disastrous campaigns as well. Now, Deng Xiaoping still had a lot of personal influence. He was kind of a transitional figure, and he used his individual authority in a more positive way to try to, first of all, criticize the Mao system and to establish a more institutional system, and of course to introduce market reform and opening. But I would have said that Chinese leaders would never welcome, Chinese party officials would never welcome another personalistic, dictatorial type leader again, because of the lessons they had learned in the past. But much to our surprise, we see Xi Jinping emerging as a more personalistic leader with greater concentration of power. He's trying to rule like a strongman. Now, I think it's important to emphasize that we don't really know what goes on within the collective leadership. We don't really know what goes on within the standing committee. So it is possible that it's not that he has kind of grabbed power in his own hand, but that this group of 7 leaders have basically delegated to him this authority, that there's a lot of deliberation that still goes on in the standing committee. And so it is it is still collective leadership with certain norms and rules governing them, but that they're just putting this strong leader up front. But it is interesting, nevertheless, even if that is true, that the PR campaign in China is very much designed to have everyone see Xi Jinping as a strong leader in charge of everything and making decisions about everything. So I just want to inject that note of caution that we don't know for sure how much is really he as the ultimate principal or how much he is the agent of the collective leadership. But this image or reality of concentration of power is something quite surprising and quite new. Now, it appears that Xi Jinping had, and quite possibly other senior leaders as well, concluded that the Zhang and Hu eras were really were failures. That those leaders were too weak, especially Hu Jintao. That he and Wen Jiabao were very indecisive. Issues just sort of cycled without making a decision. Interest groups, bureaucratic interest groups, were allowed to go their own way, and nobody at the top said no. In fact, my analysis is that it was a kind of log rolling system in which the top leaders in charge of different functional areas or different industries were allowed to pretty much go their own way. And nobody else in the collective leadership or Hu Jintao or Wen Jiabao told them no. And so you get a kind of disjointed and sometimes mutually contradictory set of policies. And in foreign policy, and it led to a kind of my analysis, I don't know what Xi Jinping thinks, but my analysis is that it led to a kind of overreaching, both in domestic internal security, trying to maintain social stability, and this whole Weiwen effort of focusing a lot of resources and energy on maintaining social security, which means preventing large-scale protests against the party. And also overreaching on the foreign policy side, quite more assertive behavior, provocative behavior, especially in South China Sea, especially in the reaction to the North Korean aggression against South Korea. The foreign ministry wasn't really in charge of these issues, but other interest groups took the lead, and there was no restraint being exercised by Hu Jintao. We also have a lot of examples of lack of effective civilian control by Hu Jintao over the military. There are a lot of reports of Hu Jintao picking up the phone and calling the military commission and saying, okay, time to start talking to the Americans, enough of this freezing dialogue because you don't like Taiwan arms sales, this is really getting dangerous, I'm about to make a visit to the U.S., time to start talking. And they come back to him shortly after that and say, sir, do you think you could put that in writing? In other words, a direct order from Hu Jintao to the military wasn't enough. So, and there are a lot of other examples of that, including efforts to address corruption in the military, which Hu Jintao failed to do. So, some people, some generals, and some observers of civil-military relations in China today are saying that when Xi Jinping came over to the military commission after he was appointed vice president and then became the second civilian in the military commission, he observed firsthand that Hu Jintao was kind of just a figurehead and didn't really have effective control over the military, or sufficient control. I mean, fortunately, the military didn't go off and start a war somewhere, but at a minimum, there was poor coordination. Now, this dissatisfaction with the style of leadership under Hu Jintao that Xi Jinping and others may be feeling is also related to Xi Jinping's princeling status. The fact that his father was a very important leader of the Deng Xiaoping, Mao Zedong generation, highly respected, and Xi Jinping and other princelings who, this is really their era. For a long time they have not been in political power, but now many of them are in political power of this same generation. And their perspective seems to be, of course we're guessing, Xi Jinping has not told me this, but this is, and you know, it is kind of dangerous to base analyses on rumors in China, which are rife. Having said that, I'll proceed to do that. People I know who know Xi Jinping have told me that really his attitude and that of other princelings is that that these self-made politicians like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao were just kind of placeholders. They were just minding the store till Xi and other princelings were of the suitable age to come and inherit the party from their fathers. So they feel that they have the mantle of power of party leadership has been passed down to them from their fathers, and that they have this kind of aristocratic attitude. And the tension, the cleavage between the princelings and the self-made politicians is one that I think you will expect to see grow in the future. She is trying to improve decisive leadership, and the fact that this is a different kind of system is reflected in at least one very important institutional feature, and that is that in the Standing Committee of the Politburo we now have two-tier system. Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang are the retirement age is one norm, strong norm on the party side. By the way, this is not a rule yet. It's not a written rule on the party side, nor is the 2 terms or anything like that, but it is a strong norm. And the Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang are of a suitable age that they can remain in power for 2 5-year terms. This, at the 18th Party Congress back in 2012, they had a problem of, first of all, they wanted to reduce the size of the Standing Committee in order to make it more decisive and less problems of log rolling and everybody going their own way. So with a smaller, only 7-person Standing Committee, they had more Politburo members who could be promoted to Standing Committee than seats. This is the first time they've ever faced this problem. Previously, basically everybody of the right age got promoted up from Politburo to Standing Committee. A lot of people said, it was factional, these were Jiang Zemin's people or something, but Alice Miller, who is our leading expert of Chinese political institutions, made us realize that no, it's not that. It's simply that everybody of that age got promoted. But now they had too many people. What to do? And I call this the risk, the problem of disappointed losers. You know, in elite politics in these types of systems, do you really want to push people out of power who could then organize some kind of elite coup against you. We've sort of seen that problem already appear with Bo Xilai, who mobilized a public following. He wasn't promoted the way he had expected to. He had big ambitions, and he and perhaps with Zhou Yongcan, the security czar, organized. Now the official media is saying that they engaged in anti-party organized activity. They're in effect telling people that they were colluding to try to carry out some kind of elite coup. This is remarkable. So the problem of disappointed losers, they solved this problem using age. So they promoted 5 people to standing committee who were the older ones in the Politburo. And they said to them, you can stay for 5 years. And then we will promote the younger ones for the second term. So what you have then is a 2-tier system. Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang are there for 10 years. And they, especially Xi, will decide who is going to then join the Standing Committee of the Politburo for the second term, which will include possibly choosing his successor, which is something that in Chinese system has not really been permitted in the past. In other words, there have been more effort to prevent a dictatorial leader from choosing his own successor. But this 2-tier system puts Xi Jinping in a position to choose his own successor, especially because of the anti-corruption campaign. The anti-corruption campaign has 2 features. One feature is that it is really aimed at restoring the integrity of the party and therefore the popular respect for the party, which has been eroded by this systemic corruption and very large-scale corruption. And this, of course, has made Xi Jinping hugely popular with the public. He is very, very popular with the masses. But a second dimension is when, of course, in a system where corruption is so pervasive, who you go after is highly selective. And this anti-corruption campaign definitely has the characteristics of a purge. It is targeting retired, very, very senior leaders and even some current, quite high-level leaders who appear to be associated with who could be potential rivals to Xi Jinping. So far, there have been 61 ministry-level or above officials investigated, which is huge. So, and no one closely associated with Xi Jinping has been targeted. So, this definitely looks like it's a self-interested effort on the part of Xi Jinping to eliminate challenges to his power. And it includes, of course, the military. And this scandal of rank buying and selling in the military, which really is shaming the military very drastically. And, we heard a joke from a Chinese friend the other day. He said this joke going around in China, well, China only lost 1 general in the Civil War, but it's lost 32 under Xi Jinping. So people are really kind of quaking in their boots. People feel quite intimidated. It's a problem with government officials who are basically doing nothing. They're trying to keep their heads down because they're intimidated. But by trying to eliminate rivals, what Xi Jinping is doing is kind of redistributing the spoils of office, redistributing power and redistributing rents and potential corruption, because, I don't think anybody believes that Xi Jinping's family is truly out of any corrupt activities now. They try to put out the image that his family was told, to get out of doing business entirely after Bloomberg published a huge expose of all of his family corrupt activities. But there's no reason to believe that his family is any cleaner than anybody else's. So redistributing the spoils is always a very disruptive and destabilizing thing to a regime like this. You are really, he is potentially asking for trouble. And, I am very interested to see if there is any elite challenge to Xi Jinping to try to stop him from doing this. Now, the fact that he is so popular makes a actual elite coup, open coup, I think quite unlikely, because groups of officials who want to challenge Xi Jinping will be faced with a public that loves him. But let's watch and see what happens with the Chinese economy. If there were, of course, growth is declining, but if there is just slower growth, I don't think will actually erode popular support for Xi Jinping substantially. But if there's an economic crisis of some sort, a real crash in real estate markets, banking system, something like that, or some kind of international crisis, you can imagine that the public might turn against Xi Jinping, in which case I think there would be a substantial risk of some kind of elite split and coup. Now, there are a lot of other aspects of what she is doing domestically. Many people in China are hoping that Xi Jinping is actually more like Deng Xiaoping than like Mao Zedong. He is actually consolidating his power so that he can implement a very ambitious third wave of economic reform. So this, I'd say, it's as yet unclear whether or not that is really the case. Of course, the third plenum document was really quite good in terms of the vision of the changing the relationship between the state and the economy. But implementation has been quite slow. And what actually troubles me is that I don't see any political strategy for implementing the market reforms in terms of building constituencies of support from powerful interest groups, or figuring out side payments to overcome the resistance of vested interest in the state-owned sector or other, and especially local leaders. The fiscal reform has been quite slow. They don't have a new revenue source to substitute for real estate, and yet they're being restricted more and more for how much they can use land in order to fund their obligations. So right now they're dragging their feet at implementing other reforms because they have no incentive to do so. So it seems to me that the way economic reform is being implemented is very much this top-down approach of just Xi Jinping's power behind it, and it's supposed to happen. But my own research that Chung-In referred to of earlier waves of economic reform suggests that actually the design of market reform needs to find a way to develop a kind of bandwagon of interest groups behind the reform. And without that, it's unlikely to be implemented. Now, Xi Jinping is also kind of hearkening back to the Mao era in ways that are disturbing to a lot of groups within China, especially intellectuals, professionals, and the private sector. In universities, there's tightening ideological control, anti-Western ideology, back to studying Mao Zedong thought and Marxism. And this is obviously in tension with China's ambitions to become a modern world-class technology power and innovative power. This kind of tightening up of ideological education, professors getting fired for what they've said in the classroom. This had never happened before. Contacts with foreign colleagues are viewed as kind of risky now, and there's a kind of chilling effect of this kind of ideological tightening. Of course, also heightened control over internet and media. And, you know, someone recently told me that his hope for 2015 was to have freedom from fear. That there is a kind of palpable fear, especially among scholars, intellectuals, and private business people. And he has reversed the verdicts on the Mao era. You know, he has stated that the first 30 years of the PRC were just as good as the second 30 years, which is, in effect, going back on Deng Xiaoping's effort to take a more critical perspective on the Mao era. So I'm not saying Xi Jinping is Mao, but there are some disturbing signs that he's kind of modeling his leadership style on Mao. And that being a strong leader, what he knows about how to be a strong leader, he saw in Mao. And that's what he's modeling himself on. Now, foreign policy. What about foreign policy? Foreign policy, I think, might actually end up being better, more restrained, and less creating a lower risk of military conflict than under Hu Jintao, which is kind of a paradox. Because Xi has taken control of foreign policy through this National Security Council. And he has very much tried to improve the coordination of different agencies. So, of course, he makes it sound very tough, very strong. He said, we take all the fingers and turn it into a fist. Sounds very tough, and certainly during the first 2 years, he did take measures to show resolve on maritime sovereignty disputes in the East China Sea with Japan and in the South China Sea, the ADIZ, the sending of the oil rig opposite Vietnam, etc. And it played very well with the nationalist public. But it also provoked a backlash from China's neighbors, which of course had started under Hu Jintao, in which after years of very effective good neighbor policy that China had undertaken from the mid-90s to about 2008, 2009, to reassure its neighbors that as it grew more powerful, it was not a threat. It had friendly intentions, and it could be win-win and work together. And that really was remarkably effective foreign policy, but under Hu Jintao's weak leadership, a lot of these interest groups kind of ran away to get bigger budgets, more ships, more planes, and started stirring up trouble and bringing television and other journalists with them to publicize their activities to preserve China's sovereignty in a way that made them very popular and actually stoked nationalist sentiment. South China Sea had not been a major focal point of nationalist sentiment before that time. It was really all about Japan, all about Taiwan, and a little bit toward the United States. So South China Sea became a focal point of nationalism, I think, because of the freelancing and unrestrained actions of these interest groups, including, Marine Surveillance Bureau and people like that. So I think that, and of course what happened then is China's Asian neighbors came running to the U.S. and said, oh, can't we exercise with you, and would you like to refuel here, would you like to train here? Everybody, ran to try to get some protection from the United States, from the China threat, as threat perceptions grew. Well, this is not in China's interest. China doesn't want two blocs in Asia at all. So I think Xi Jinping, there's signs that, and certainly the speech he gave to the Foreign Affairs very big meeting that doesn't happen every year. It happens only every few years. He gave a speech in November. He also gave a speech in October before that about peripheral diplomacy with its neighbors. And it seems that he gets it, that he understands that it's too costly to China to make all of its neighbors mad at it at the same time. So it looks to me like maybe, and this is highly speculative, what he's doing is trying to satisfy this nationalist sentiment and this sense that now that China is stronger, it shouldn't take such a low-key foreign policy. No more Tao Guang Yang Hui. It's time for China to take the lead and do something. He's trying to satisfy that demand more through these regional economic diplomatic initiatives like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, like the Silk Road belt, like the Maritime Silk Road, and all of these things can be celebrated in the media in China and make, patriotic Chinese feel proud, but it really is, it's actually welcomed by a lot of China's neighbors. It's creating, as they say, sort of regional public goods, or even private goods maybe, but meaning only for particular countries, but it's certainly not picking a fight. And it has a more positive orientation that I think we should welcome. Of course, China's a rising power. It's going to want to take the lead. It can't be number 2 or 3 or just a follower forever. This is quite predictable. And what I'm hoping to see, and it's too early to tell, that maybe there will be a sort of playing down of the sovereignty disputes, which present much greater risk to China in terms of alienating its neighbors, because these other initiatives are a substitute for that kind of picking fights with your neighbors over territory. So let's see if that happens. I think it could happen. Of course, those territorial issues are also handy for dialing up when a leader wants to distract people from domestic problems and rally around the flag and rally around the individual leader. And we see that China's not the only country that behaves that way in East Asia. So, you know, maybe Xi Jinping will be able and motivated and able to exercise that kind of restraint on the sovereignty issues, or maybe he won't. And I think this also is important for Sino-US relations, because it looks, as we see from the APEC meeting, that Xi Jinping is motivated to try to stabilize, recalibrate relations with the United States and even with Japan. And if he can cool off the sovereignty element in Chinese foreign policy, I think it'll be much easier to improve relations with Japan, obviously, and with the United States, because China's image, China's reputation as being a responsible player in the world will be strengthened. So, I guess in conclusion, I would say that the return to personalistic leadership in China has, from my perspective, some pretty risky and negative features in terms of the domestic political scene, but could paradoxically have some positive outcomes on the international scene. I'll stop there.
Okay. Stefan seems to be very happy, and he seems to be very satisfied. It's very rare. You want to raise a question? Okay.
Yeah, I'm Shepard Iverson. I'm a anthropologist, actually, at University. And